Our story begins with the return of Sakurako, the conqueror of the Bao Dungeon, and everyone is excited to see her. They know that the Bao Dungeon, which appeared in Russia 6 years ago, was an S-rank dungeon that no player in the world had been able to clear. This means that clearing it is a historic achievement for humanity, and that achievement rests in Sakurako's hands. Orami Sakurako, the 100 Flower Blooming Guildmaster, an S-rank player ranked 3rd overall with a Grand Sorcerer class, and the Nine-Tailed Fox skill, proudly tells her fans that this outcome was expected. A reporter then asks her if she thinks the Lulu Heart Dungeon, which is considered the most difficult dungeon in history, might soon be cleared. Others speculate that if anyone could do it, it would be Sakurako. She smirks at the mention of the ultimate goal of all players, but tells everyone it has nothing to do with her. She arrogantly announces that she clears dungeons for herself. Then she walks off toward her car as reporters chase after her, trying to question her further, but she ignores them. Meanwhile, in our protagonist Kaki Yukari's house, he is watching Sakurako's video and realizes it's about time for his part-time job. He stands up to change his clothes, wondering if he remembered correctly that his job today was transporting supplies to a dungeon. He then recalls Sakurako's arrogant announcement about clearing dungeons for herself and falls silent for a moment. Later, on a city rooftop, he stands gazing at the dungeon tower in front of him, thinking that even he wishes he could challenge it. The Lulu Heart Dungeon is the first dungeon to have appeared in this world and is the most difficult dungeon globally, with no one ever having cleared it. Every time the news introduces a new player, Yukari dreams that one day he could be one of them, but it never happens. When he was evaluated, the specialists apologized and told him he was skillless and therefore unable to enter dungeons. Still, he remained persistent and tried to challenge dungeons. However, players didn't want to work with someone who was skillless and bullied him, calling him useless. Even his coworker advised him to stop dreaming, insisting that he didn't mean to be harsh, but was simply being a friend, saying he understood Yukari didn't want to accept it. But the truth was that he had no talent. Skillless, a term used for those who cannot receive the benefits of skills and are unable to become players. If a skillless person enters a dungeon, 90% of them die, and the remaining 10% go missing. Because of this, people without skills are no longer allowed to be involved with dungeon gates. Yukari knows in his mind that he is skillless and not one of the chosen ones, and yet he still can't give up. So he continues working part-time jobs related to dungeons, thinking how foolish he is for doing so. He looks at his new sword sadly, knowing that even though he bought it, there may never be a day when he gets to use it. Suddenly, the ground shakes and everyone is shocked by a loud growl. The system then issues a warning. A dungeon break has occurred. From the Panam dungeon, the plague that spreads in solitude is descending. The nun who devours the future from the Oryx dungeon and the lamb mistaken for all time from the Forest dungeon also emerge. Yukari and other citizens begin to flee while the system repeatedly warns that a swarm of the lamb mistaken for all time continues to pour out. One of the monsters chases him. He runs with all his might, wondering why there are monsters in the middle of the city and what on earth is happening. He swings his sword backward to slash at the monster, but is shocked when the sword he just bought breaks in half without even scratching it. He looks back in fear and sees the monster's mouth about to bite him. He thinks he's going to die. Luckily, someone powerful appears just in time and uses the Scarlet Leafly Flash skill to slash the monster into pieces. She lands in front of him and asks if he is hurt. He is stunned when he sees Oramachi Sierra, a member of the 100 Flower Blooming Guild, an S-rank player ranked 8th with a Swordmaster class and the Eye of Truth skill. He stutters a thank you for saving him. She turns around and explains that monsters are overflowing from dungeons all over the world and that the area is especially dangerous, so he must flee at once. Yet, he asks if there's anything he can do to help. She replies with concern on her face that the only thing he can do right now is run away. He wants to object, but he knows better than anyone that he can't do anything. He replies that she's probably right. Sarah then walks forward and shouts for him to run now. He obeys and runs in the opposite direction, leaving Sarah behind to face the swarm of monsters, her eyes closed in despair and guilt. Minutes later, he stopped running to catch his breath and hid behind a nearby car park. Yet he noticed that no matter where he ran, there were monsters. He continued running, knowing the main streets were too exposed and he had to escape into the alleyways. But he was shocked when he saw a lady lying in a pool of blood and asked her worriedly if she was okay. The lady simply asked him back if he was human. He bent down next to her, telling her they needed to get her to a hospital quickly. Knowing that with wounds like hers, there was no way to save her, he hesitated but remembered Sierra, who had saved him. He told himself that he couldn't just run away again, that there had to be something he could do. He was about to grab her and say he would take her somewhere safe, but she slapped his hand away and shouted at him not to touch her. She added that she hadn't fallen so low as to need help from a mere human, but he grabbed her forcefully, shocking her. She shouted, asking if she hadn't already told him not to touch her. He placed her on his back and ran with all his might. While she kept shouting at him to let her go, he simply shouted back for her to hold on because they were running. Meanwhile, the plague dragon that spread in solitude flew above the city, gathered power in its mouth, and released it downward, causing a massive explosion that turned everything to dust. Yukari, who was carrying the lady, was caught in the blast and thrown violently to the ground. He slammed and bounced a few times before stopping himself from rolling. He immediately sat up, trying to comprehend what had just happened. But when he looked back, he was shocked to see the dragon's eyes staring directly at him. He froze in fear, but grew confused when the dragon looked past him and began scanning the area, showing no interest in him. He wondered why it wasn't attacking. Perhaps it was searching for something. Snapping out of it, he realized he needed to help the lady. He frantically searched and found her lying on the ground nearby. He lifted her back onto his back and began running again. She looked at him and calmly asked why he kept resisting so much. She explained that even if they kept running, both of them would die anyway, and asked if that wasn't obvious. But he kept running and replied that she was absolutely right. Yet even so, that wasn't a reason to do nothing. He said he would simply do what he could right now, which surprised her. She then asked him if, in other words, he wanted to change the situation. He replied that he did, and added that if he could, he'd even save the world. But he knew he couldn't. That was why, at the very least, he just wanted to save her. This surprised her even more. She calmly responded by saying, "Is that so?" and told him that their interests aligned. She pushed him away slightly, admitting she hated the idea of relying on a fragile human, but since he was the only vessel available, she had no choice. She offered him the chance to save the world in exchange for his soul. He asked how she could even do that, and she answered that it would be by going back to the past and starting over. She then ordered him to state his name, and he replied that his name was Kanaki Yukari. She cast a magic circle with overwhelming dark power, which shocked him. She introduced herself as Lulu Heart, the soul-devouring demon lord and ruler of the Lulu Heart dungeon. He couldn't believe he was seeing a demon lord. He then saw her take out a bright star and heard her say that the Lulu Heart dungeon was a golden memory that must never be lost. She squeezed the star and told him she was entrusting its fate to him. Suddenly, a strong force dragged him away, and the system displayed a message stating that although his life was empty, he had risked it to save the girl in the world. In recognition of his deed, the round table granted him a skill. However, the system encountered an error. It detected that he lacked talent and causality. The system began reviewing his status, and the round table created a skill suitable for him as a special exception. The system then generated a skill and revealed that he had been granted the skill Lost Man, a skill that loses oneself with an unknown rank. The system expressed respect and bestowed a blessing for his resolve to lose everything. A moment later, he opened his eyes and sat up in shock. He looked at his tablet and saw news about a new Baal dungeon appearing in Russia. He couldn't believe it, knowing that was a story from 6 years ago. He was even more shocked when he saw the date on his phone, wondering why it showed a date from 6 years ago. Suddenly, a lady with a sharp horn spoke, telling him that he had finally woken up. She smiled at him, causing him to drop his phone in horror as he wondered what had happened. Years ago, the Tower of Beginnings suddenly appeared in Shinjuku, and it was called the Lulu Heart Dungeon. As if in response, dungeon towers began emerging one after another across the world, and within them resided supernatural monsters. In contrast, those who awakened to extraordinary powers and skills also began to appear. These individuals were called players. Skills allowed their wielders to perform feats impossible for ordinary humans, defying the very laws of physics. Those chosen by skills ventured into dungeons, marking the beginning of a new era centered around them. In the present, a young Lulu Heart smiles at him, and in panic, he asks her what has happened. She simply replies that he has regressed, which confuses him even more. She then explains that he has regressed roughly 6 years into the past, and it was the result of the demon lord Lulu Heart's grand magic. He asks her if going back in time is even possible, and she proudly replies that nothing is impossible for her. However, she admits that she lost most of her magical power, which is why she ended up in such an adorable form, and informs him that no one else can see her but him. He then realizes that she seems somewhat familiar. Recalling the older Lulu heart, she tells him that she has fulfilled her part of the contract, so now it's his turn to fulfill his. He will be working to stop the dungeon break. He responds that he'd love to help, but he has no idea what to do. She explains that the dungeon break was a calamity caused by demon lords ruling over other dungeons. Their objective was to invade her Lulu Heart dungeon, which held the greatest concentration of magical power in the world. She adds that since they couldn't defeat someone as powerful as her alone, they formed an alliance across all dungeons. This means that if they systematically conquer every dungeon in this world, they can prevent that future from happening. However, he responds that it's really hard for him to say, but he admits he's incredibly weak and has no skills. He adds that he has never even set foot inside a dungeon before. Yet he is shocked when she asks, "What about it?" and tells him it doesn't matter in the slightest. What's important is his resolve. She explains to him that to a demon lord like her, humans are all the same, so he shouldn't worry. She assures him that she will personally train him to become the strongest. She then firmly and confidently swears to him that he will surpass the limits of humanity and protect her beloved Lulu Heart dungeon. A moment later in the Frank dungeon, Lemura, they arrive. He looks around as it's his first time stepping into a dungeon, but instead of excitement, he feels a sense of restlessness. He then asks her about the training she mentioned. She releases her power floating in the air and replies that he'll understand once they start. Seeing her dark magical power, he panics, shouting for her to wait a moment and asking what she's about to do. But she simply reaches out and places her hand on his chest, making him scream in pain. He feels dizzy and wonders what is happening. His head begins to ache so badly it feels like it's splitting. Yet she calmly explains that she infused her magic directly into his magical circuits. Now, even someone as skillless as him should be able to sense magic. He kneels on the ground in pain as her magic spreads through his body, and he wonders what she's talking about. She tells him that it seems by acquiring a skill, he also obtained a magical circuit to handle mana. But he doesn't listen. His body is overwhelmed with pain, burning from the inside. He can't think properly and feels himself slowly losing consciousness. At that moment, he wishes there were no pain. The system detects his desire to lose pain, and because of it, he meets the conditions of his unique skill, Lost Man. Suddenly, he feels the pain vanish. When he looks up, the system shows him that the pain has been lost. However, since the skill is only level 1, the effect duration is limited. He couldn't believe that the pain was gone and felt something circulating throughout his body. He looked at his hand and saw magical power, prompting him to ask if it was mana. He knew that mana was essential for using skills in class magic, and remembered that in the world before his regression, he couldn't even sense it. He clenched his hand, overjoyed to see magical power flowing from his body. Lulu Heart, who saw his system as well, asked him if she was right in saying that his skill was a pretty convenient ability. She remarked that humans had too many unnecessary things. Then she decided to begin their training and instructed him to try gathering the mana flowing through his body into his legs. She infused her mana into his legs while explaining that if he could control mana well enough, he could move beyond human limits. He focused intently and tried his best to gather his mana into his legs. For a second, he managed to channel some mana there, but it quickly spread back through his body. He told her that he couldn't control it properly. Whenever he tried to gather mana into his legs, it dispersed midway. She responded that she hadn't expected him to succeed from the start, which surprised him. He commented that she was kinder than he expected, admitting that he thought she would push him to get it right immediately. However, she smirked and laughingly told him that his will and ability didn't matter in the slightest. Confused, he asked what the hell that was supposed to mean. Then he noticed a sound around them and asked her if she heard it too. Suddenly, a monster appeared, rushing toward him. He froze for a second, then snapped to attention when he realized it was an orc. The orc chased after him as he ran, shouting in panic, asking what was happening and why there was an orc at the entrance. Floating beside him, she reminded him that even weakened, he had absorbed the demon lord. To a monster, that was like the finest delicacy appearing before its eyes. She then excitedly told him that monsters would now come to devour him. Meanwhile, she gracefully floated around with tea and cake while he ran for his life, shouting that he had never fought before. She calmly sat down midair and explained that if he infused mana into his legs and accelerated, he should be able to escape. He shouted back that was exactly what he couldn't do, which was why he was in trouble. She only looked confused at his complaint and asked if she was right in thinking that he should just get better at it. He shouted at her that she was the worst. The orc raised its spiked hammer and swung it down at him. In the emergency situation, he managed to channel mana into his legs and, in a panic, strengthened them. He jumped away just in time, avoiding the hammer that would have crushed him, leaving the orc shocked. A short distance away, he stopped and realized that for a moment, mana had surged into his legs, evident from the deep footprint left behind. He felt his entire body overflowing with power and was thrilled to experience mana manipulation for the first time. Lulu Heart told him it was fine to be amazed, but he would die if he didn't act. Looking up, he saw more massive orcs standing in front of him. One of them swung its hammer down, and he froze in fear, thinking this was the end. The orc struck him and crushed him in one hit. The system displayed that he had died, and the round table would retrieve his skills. But then he heard Lulu Heart's voice saying, "That won't do." She asked why he was dying and leaving her behind, as if she'd ever allow that. A demon hand then appeared, shattering the system's attempt to retrieve his skill. The system errored briefly and displayed a new message. Interference by Demon Lord Lulu Heart had prevented skill retrieval. Due to the contract between him and Lulu Heart, he would now return to 1 hour before. He then woke up and screamed in fear, realizing he was about to be hit by the spiked hammer. Yet Lulu Heart greeted him with a cheerful "good morning" and asked if he had a nice sleep. She then drew out her mana and asked if they should resume. Before he could finish asking what she was doing, she placed her hand on his chest again and sent her mana into his mana circuit once more, causing him to scream in pain. However, he remembered the sensation from before, and just minutes later the system activated his Lostman skill, which relieved him of the pain. Furious, he asked her what she was doing, but she simply asked him back if he had time to be spouting nonsense. At that moment, he felt a presence behind him. Fortunately, he jumped away in time before he was crushed again. He began to run while shouting that he thought he had died. Lulu Heart confirmed that he had died. He'd been crushed by an orc and turned into mincemeat. He asked her why he was alive again. She explained that there was a death return contract between them. When he dies, he returns to the world 1 hour before. He was confused, but there was no time to think about it. He kept running. Lulu Heart then told him not to worry about unnecessary things because the only thing he needed to know was that until he stops the dungeon break, he can't die permanently. They were in this together, and there was no way she'd allow him to die and leave her behind. She then shouted at him to show her his resolve. The orc caught up to him, but once again, he managed to channel mana into his legs and jumped away to dodge its attack. Lulu Heart praised him, saying his reaction was better than the first time. She admitted that she thought it would take longer for him to control magic, but it seemed dying once had an effect. She then formed a sword using her magical power and told him that if he was going to become strong enough to prevent the dungeon break, he couldn't keep running away forever. He accepted the sword, knowing he hadn't come back just to keep fleeing from orcs. He couldn't stay stuck there. She walked closer to him and told him that she would only say this once, so he should pay attention. She began explaining that the magic circuits inside him, the parts that connect to the magic overflowing in the world, were linked to his soul. In other words, with a strong will, he could control magic. But to do that, he needed a strong desire, which could be a passionate wish to grow stronger, or even the arrogance of wanting to save the world. She then asked him what exactly he desired. He remembered the dragon that had effortlessly destroyed the city and replied that he wanted to stop the dungeon and he wanted to become strong. The orc raised its hammer and swung it at him, but he bent his body low to dodge it. He immediately sat up and dashed toward the orc, driven by his new determination. Raising his sword, he channeled his mana into the blade, which allowed him to slice the orc cleanly in half with a single swing. He then caught his breath in exhaustion, but he was glad he had done it. For the first time, he had defeated a monster. Lulu Heart reminded him that she had told him he could do it if he tried, and admitted that she was planning to have him die about 100 times to get his body used to magic. But thanks to his Lostman skill, it had saved them both some trouble, making him realize once again that Lulu Heart was really the worst. They suddenly heard footsteps rushing toward them and saw a large group of orcs charging forward. Lulu Heart excitedly shouted to him that the next wave was coming. He quickly channeled mana into his legs and jumped above the oncoming orcs, running through the air at high speed as he felt magic coursing through his entire body. Descending towards the orc, he slashed one of the orcs cleanly in half. Dodging another orc's attack, He spun his body and sliced through it with one smooth swing. His body, moving beyond imagination, responded with precision. With growing confidence, he continued slashing through the orcs around him. 1 hour later, Lulu Hart praised him for defeating 10 orcs in a single hour, calling it pretty good for a beginner. He added that if he kept it up, he would grow even stronger. However, she remained silent. Suddenly, they heard someone screaming in the distance. Quietly approaching the sound, they saw a man holding a blood-drenched knife, shouting at someone, calling them an idiot, a real idiot. The man scolded a young woman for not abandoning the others, saying she might have won if she had. He then teasingly addressed her by name, or Machi Sierra. She was younger with her Eye of Truth skill active, but she didn't have a class yet and was only frank. The man told Sora that she really had good eyes, then raised his knife and shouted that he was right to target her. Sora remained calm even as the knife neared her face. But before the blade struck, Yukari appeared just in time, blocking the attack with his sword and shouting that he wouldn't let him do it. Furiously, Yukari demanded if the man understood what he was doing, but the man stronger than him easily pushed him back and calmly asked who the hell he was. Sarah shouted that the man was a serial killer who targeted beginners, and she cried out in concern, urging Yukari to run away. He looked back and recognized her. Sierra, the S-rank player who had helped him in the world before his regression. The man, Akazuki K, pushed Yukari again and began slashing at him with his knife, tauntingly asking if he really had time to be looking away. Eventually, Yukari's sword was knocked from his hand. Realizing he had used too much magic and couldn't summon any strength, Kei told him he was full of openings, then activated Wave of Terror Level 3, which inflicted fear. The system displayed that Yukari was affected by terror status. He would feel intense fear toward Akazuki Kei, be unable to use skills, and have reduced stats for a certain period of time. Kei struck him with his knife, stabbing him through the abdomen. Yukari screamed in pain as the blade pierced him. Kei pulled the knife out and calmly turned his attention back to Sierra, who was already badly injured. Still conscious, Yukari managed to tell him to stop, but Kei continued forward. He knelt beside Sierra, saying he just wanted to understand what those skills were all about. Yukari could only watch in horror as Sierra screamed. Kei had stabbed her eye. Kei then muttered to Sarah and the other two corpses that he hoped to discover something when he dissected them. He stabbed Sarah's eye again and continued to stab her repeatedly, her screams growing louder with each stab. Yukari, furious and heartbroken, tried to move, but his bleeding intensified. He screamed at Kei to stop and remembered how in the previous timeline, Sierra had saved him, but now he could do nothing to save her. Kei laughed maniacally and grabbed his hair, while he thought to himself that he was too weak, too powerless, that this was why it was happening. Kei began stabbing him over and over until Yukari was killed. But as before, due to the contract, he returned to 1 hour prior. He woke up in the same place where he had just defeated 10 orcs. He turned to Luluard and told her that he had a favor to ask. She smiled, intrigued, and told him to go ahead and say it. He stood up and declared confidently that he wanted her to make him stronger, no matter how many times he had to die, because he wanted to defeat that murderer. She simply responded that she got it and told him that she couldn't care less about that little girl. But if this was what was driving him, then she'd let him go wild and personally whip him into shape. A moment later, Kei told Sarah that even though she had just become a player today, it was impressive how well she was holding out against his killing skills. He added that she was definitely Sakurako's sister, but he commented, today's dungeon was pretty thin on monsters. Kei then dashed toward her, shouting that he would take his sweet time breaking her. Yet Sierra remained calm and waited for him to get closer. But before the knife could reach her, Yukari appeared out of nowhere and blocked the strike. Kei demanded to know who the hell he was and whether he knew Sierra. Sarah collapsed on her knees in pain, shouted at Yukari to get out of there immediately because Kei targeted beginners. But Yukari stood his ground, doing his best to block Kei's attacks. He told Sierra to leave Kei to him. He would handle it from here. Unfortunately for him, he died at Kei's hands again. He remembered hearing about a beginner killer even before going back in time. But Sarah had never suffered such serious injuries before. He thought it must be his fault since he had lured all the dungeon's orcs away. Kei had free rein to strike. He knew he couldn't change that fact now. Even with Lulu Hart's contract, he couldn't return to a point earlier than his first death. He guessed that if he'd killed the orcs faster, it might not have happened. Once more, he thought everything had happened because he was weak. Then he died again. When he died for the third time, Lulu Hart lectured him, saying his swordplay was too straightforward, that killing Kay required a sneakier approach. On the fourth try, she told him to pay attention to the flow of his movements and to stop separating offense and defense. He needed to connect everything fluidly. On the fifth, she yelled that his mana was disrupted again and warned him never to lose focus no matter what was happening. On the sixth, she taught him to read his opponent's mana and assured him that by doing so, he would naturally anticipate their next move. On the seventh, she told him Kay's strategy relied heavily on counters, so Yukari needed to bait him into attacking. On the eighth attempt, Sierra, who had been watching, asked why he was going so far for them. On the 10th death, Luluhart asked if he wasn't afraid of dying. He replied that he had nothing left, and if he didn't put everything on the line, he wouldn't be able to save anyone, even if it cost him his life. This amazed and surprised Luluhart at the same time. He knew that if he gave up now, the dungeon break would result in countless deaths. And when weighing the lives of everyone else against his own pain, the choice was obvious. Luluhart silently watched him continue trying to defeat the murderer and die once more. She remembered all the people she had seen in dungeons, how they abandoned their teammates without hesitation and only looked out for themselves. That's why she couldn't understand why Yukari kept sacrificing himself for others. Yukari died again and again at the murderer's hands for hours until Kay was finally impressed by how Yukari read his movements as if it were his first time. He didn't realize Yukari had died so many times that he could now predict Kay's actions instinctively. Kay arrogantly told him that the difference between them was their commitment to dying, that Yukari didn't have it in him. Yukari was momentarily confused and wondered if even after all this, his resolve still wasn't enough. But then he stood up thinking to himself, even so, and even then, he wouldn't let anyone die. Luluhart was speechless for a moment before shouting to him that she hadn't expected him to come this far. So now she would tell him what was missing, the final piece he needed. She told him the missing piece was recognizing how strong he had already become. Her words shocked and stunned him into silence. He then looked away, not knowing how to respond. Luluhart told him he was still stuck seeing himself as weak. It was true that he had no talent, no skills, and no mana in the past, yet he kept coming back, even after dying over and over. Even though he could have abandoned that little girl and run, he didn't. He was about to argue with her about abandoning Sierra, but she cut him off, stating that he hadn't run. And no matter how many times he lost his life, he had chosen to keep fighting. That was why he had grown strong. She floated closer to him, pointed at him, and told him that even she, the demon lord, acknowledged his strength. She questioned why he was still moping and ordered him to stand up and lift his head. He obeyed. Kay swung the knife in his direction, but he easily dodged it. Luluhart pointed out that he could now read Kay's knife movements. Kay was shocked when he saw Yukari bend down and swing his sword to counterattack, which Kay blocked. Luluhart encouraged Yukari to swing his blade with everything he had, and Yukari managed to push Kay away with his sword, despite Kay using his knife to resist. Luluhart then remarked that Yukari could cut Kay down now, and he saw that he had slashed Kay's hand as well. She pressed him further, demanding to know how long he would continue, pretending he was weak, and shouted for him to accept his strength. Yukari noticed Kay's right foot move back and immediately recognized that a thrust was coming, which he dodged. He predicted Kay's next overhead slash and also foresaw the follow-up kick. He dodged both moves with precision, leaving Kay visibly confused and wondering about the sudden change. Yukari swung his sword at Kay again, but Kay dodged it. However, Kay was shaken. A moment ago, Yukari had been nothing more than a clueless boy who couldn't swing a sword properly, a weakling who had been covering in fear. Now Kay, who was being pushed back, questioned how he was losing to someone who had been so helpless. Yukari landed another slash on Kay's arm. He saw Kay begin to panic and knew this was his opportunity. He raised his sword and activated his Lostman skill, nullifying the fear Kay had planted in him. With mana surging into his sword, he swung it down toward Kay. Kay quickly gathered his magic power into his hand, insulted him for letting his guard down, and released another wave of fear. Yukari understood that Kay's skill relied on amplifying fear when detecting an opening. But since he had already nullified the emotion with his skill, Kay's power no longer worked on him. Fear had been fully removed from his system. The fear amplification failed. Kay was stunned. He couldn't believe his skill had been canceled. Desperate, he swung his knife at Yukari, arrogantly claiming that there was no way he could block an attack at such close range. Yukari activated Lostman again, nullifying pain just before the knife hit. Blood splattered, but he remained standing. Kay shouted that it was his win. Yukari, unfazed, simply smirked. Kei was stunned to see that Yukari had caught the knife with his bare hand. He questioned how Yukari was reading all of his moves and why none of his skills were working. Yukari exhaled and told Kei that at last he had caught up to him. Kei, overwhelmed with fear, asked who on earth he was. Yukari didn't answer and instead slashed at Kei's abdomen, declaring that it was over.